Welcome to the Marketing Department webinar, Get Your Marketing in Motion. I'm David Smith, President of the Marketing Department, and let me show you how to see all the webinar replays in our main webinar page. So you go to marketingdepartmentlv.com, click on webinars, and you can see the webinars in our series by the marketing professionals of the marketing department. Each person has an entire business in their particular area of marketing, and each of our members have presented their best wisdom in an area of marketing. Today's webinar is going to be, is social responsibility or social justice marketing right for you? With Ed Faruolo. And I'll introduce him in a moment, but I want to share just a little bit about the Marketing Department webinar series. This webinar series is based on the idea that you want to get your marketing in motion because you can't steer something that's not in motion. Maybe you feel like you're stalled in your marketing. If you can at least accomplish one action, you can begin to measure the results, and you can begin to tweak your marketing action and refine it and work toward better results. Then you can add another marketing action, but you've got to start somewhere. You've got to get your marketing in motion because you can't steer something that's not in motion. So what we have done in this series is I've asked each of our marketing department professionals to share some simple, low-hanging fruit actions that a business can take. And in each of our webinars, if you go back to our series, you can look at any webinar on the series, and each presentation is going to identify a few different marketing actions that you can easily take. And these actions then are going to not require a lot of preparation. They're not going to require a lot of training, a lot of money. They're simple things that you can do just to get started. We'll be watching for Ed to share some simple marketing activities in the area of social justice marketing. A little bit about myself. I'm the president of the marketing department. The reason we started the marketing department is that a number of businesses were having trouble doing three things. One, locating marketing vendors who are the best marketing vendors, managing the marketing vendors, and then coordinating the work of the marketing vendors, tracking and seeing that the actual work, you've got someone designing your website, someone doing your social media. How do you find the best person? How can you be sure they're actually doing the work that you hired them for? And how can you track the results? So what I did is assembled some of the very best professionals in marketing in all the various areas of marketing. We help you to a marketing strategy. We get our professionals working in your area of marketing that you need to accomplish, and then we manage them and track the results. That's the marketing department. Now let's talk about Ed Faruolo. Ed Faruolo was the chief marketing officer of Cigna Insurance for about 15 years. Ed presents seminars throughout the country to large and small organizations. His focus is on branding and on employee engagement. Today, Ed is going to help us identify a few actions that we can take in the area of social justice marketing. So Ed, I'm going to let you take over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you go ahead and share.
All righty. Just a couple of comments about this whole social justice versus social responsibility. The reason I brought it up to David was that, the more and more we look outside, we see how divided we are. And we also start seeing that companies, especially large companies, are being asked, or they're willingly sort of taking sides in a variety of different issues and so forth. And this isn't just something that is playing into large companies. I think a lot of smaller ones also could very easily get tempted to kind of get it sucked into the vortex of that. And there are times when it makes a whole lot of sense, and other times when it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think sometimes we tend to confuse a couple of terms. So there's social justice and social responsibility. So in the course of our webinar this morning, what we're going to go through is, first of all, I'll go over a couple of basic definitions. What's the difference between social justice or social justice marketing versus social responsibility? And then a little bit about, why this is important, or important to understand, not necessarily important to do. It depends on you. But then also some examples, and we'll start with large cases first, some examples there, and maybe the learning might be about what to avoid. And then a framework that if you're interested in this particular area, how to structure. And I'll go through it where it absolutely did work for a large company. And then I think more relevant to probably the participants that we have here, where it worked for a smaller company. And what are some of the key takeaways, and some low-hanging fruit, and how to make it work for you. Also, one sort of disclaimer moving into this, when it comes to some of these various issues, I'll be speaking to a couple of the larger companies in particular in terms of what they're doing. If I'm critiquing, it's not critiquing the issue itself. It's going to be critiquing what's behind how they thought about it or how they executed. So I'm not making any judgments today about what is the right kind of social justice or the wrong kind of social justice. That becomes the result of a different dynamic. The one guiding thought before we go into it is that always thinking about my social justice might be an injustice to somebody else, and it works vice versa on that. So that's why you're going to see that subhead down below that, it's tempting, but care must be taken. This is not for everybody. So let's kind of move on. Now, in terms of the basic definitions between the two, really one is about advocating and the other one is about operating. Social justice is about really advocating for a certain stance or taking a position on something, a controversial topic, usually, that it can be very real or often just perceived as an injustice by a significant portion of the population. And the topic does not necessarily relate directly to the person's business or the customer base necessarily, but it is an issue that perhaps is important to employees or management, or some reason an organizations allow themselves to get involved in that. And in terms of social responsibility, it's really about operating in a manner that's responsible through all aspects of the value chain that is there. So when you see companies that are involved with lower carbon footprints, supporting childhood education or workplace, these are usually directly related to the business, although the line does get sort of fuzzy between responsibility and social justice. So if we just think about, once again, the responsibility really is about operating in a more beneficial manner, and justice is really about focusing in on certain justice-related causes, that can be divisive, but a company chooses to undertake. So with that, let's move on in terms of, why is this important to either understand or to even do? And they fall into, three basic categories. Millennials. The audience is in Gen Z and Gen X before millennials, and even before that, baby boomers. Everybody wants young people. They're the ones that become advocates. They're the ones that create change. And it's a target audience you can grow with. So understanding who they are all about, regardless of whether you are a small company or a large company, is important. Secondly, and these are all very related to each other too, differentiation, the ability to differentiate yourself from your competition, and then to align yourself with the values of your audiences. That, hey, you know what, I'm just like you, so you should buy into our brand. So let's kind of relate that down specifically for each of these areas. And just a brief review of millennials. Like a lot of younger audiences, there isn't necessarily there isn't a trust in big institutions, and there isn't much trust in government to do what's right. Instead, there's more of a belief in counting on yourself and to create change that you want to see. But it also comes down to being an everyday change maker. Probably unlike the baby boomers that did like to go out and protest certain things, now it seems to be more impacting a mindset that's going to influence what they buy, what they wear, what they do, the food they eat, where they go, and and how they advocate to those around them. So we talk about why this is important. Differentiation. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the examples that are up there in a moment. But if you look at, for example, Nike with its featuring of Colin Kaepernick over the past year, not only in its advertising, but a variety of other venues that are out there. Gillette recently has done a program focusing in on what they were calling toxic masculinity. And Burger King back in May during Mental Health Month, actually produced what they called, in plain English, pissed off meals. And some accompanying commercials to go with that to tie into that theme. And then, of course, a company such as like Dick's Sporting Goods decided to stop selling firearms completely. So all these are tending to fall into differentiation, but also that quasi-social justice category. I believe also on the actual website or on the blog page, if it's not there now, we can put it up there. For people's reference, there is or will be links to each of these advertisements that have been out there to support these different areas, and you can sort of make some judgments for yourself about the effectiveness of these. I will be speaking a little bit more about some of my opinions on it in a moment, but let's move on to the next slide.
And we'll show you how to find that blog page at the end of this webinar. And that blog page will include the replay video for the webinar, and all the slides will be there, and the webinar notes, and as Ed mentioned, certain links that he's referring to. All that will be on the webinar blog page.
Okay, super. And then why this is important, the third area I talked about, aligns with values that, hey, I am like you. And I am struck by the Business Roundtable also recently came out with, a different statement on the purpose of a corporation, where most of us have been brought up in the era of, companies are there for shareholder results, stock performance results at the end of the day. And they've decided to take a more expanded view that, oh my goodness, it's about customers, but it's also about employees, about various stakeholders, about various issues. It's actually gotten a little bit muddled in the corners of some areas of that people that like to critique this a little bit in terms of what is, where their actual focus will be. So it tended to open up their doors a little bit more in terms of justifying getting involved in a variety of more employee-related issues and causes. So, David, you can click it to the next one. So this really kind of leads to a number of different questions, and that is, are the big brands onto something, or is this needlessly divisive? Are they turning off more people than they are turning on? Is this something that their customers are demanding, or is it their employees that are demanding this? And then what are the implications for smaller companies? Next slide. Just a note on employees, because it always sounds really, really good for becoming employee-centric. As long as it's employee-centric related to their impact on customers. I am struck by two companies right now that are extremely employee-centric, but one, Southwest, everything they do ultimately is employee-centric, but for the customer's interest. And Google right now is having some major issues internally because they're so employee-centric that people are spending their time in their different tribes, so to speak, and arguing with each other, advocating different issues and different social justice stances on different things, to the point that Google had to basically come out with some rules saying you're here to work and get a job done. So when you talk about things like employee-centric, that's really fine and good. But as long as you're not losing sight of where that money ultimately comes from, the people buying your products and services. So next slide, Dave. Good, thank you. And this kind of going back to what we were just talking about for some of what these big brands have been doing. If you look at Nike, and I think a lot of people, or most people, are probably aware of their involvement with Colin Kaepernick. It's in terms of the assessment, you could see where there's some thumbs up and thumbs down. Currently with Nike, it's a thumbs up with a question mark. When they first came out with this, or before they came out with this, there was a lot of anger generated. But then as people started to see the original spot that was produced, yes, there was certainly some anger, but it also, people realized that the way they produced it, it aligned well with the soul of the athlete brand that Nike has been espousing for years and years. At first, their sales went down, but then it went up. Most of the people who didn't like it did not tend to fall into Nike's, core users. But the jury is still out as Kaepernick himself gets involved in deeper issues, that the question becomes, does he represent Nike, or is Nike representing him? It's a very interesting question. So most people, when they look at this, say, oh, no, this was a brilliant decision and it works very, very well. I'm not so certain, because there's a long game here, a real long game. In terms of Gillette, they did some focus on toxic masculinity earlier in the year. And sometimes all the research you need to do is to go on YouTube and look at likes versus dislikes. And Gillette actually was eliminating a lot of the dislikes and negative comments for this execution that was going on. And even with that, to this day, it's still like at very least 2-to-1 negative to positive. Mm. And so the big question becomes, it's this issue of gender equality and fairness and so forth. It's not a matter of, is this issue right or wrong, but when does it make sense to portray your loyal customers as a problem? And after all, Gillette made its fortune related to portraying themselves in a certain way. So, and then also Gillette became a real drag on P&G's quarterly results. And what I found really interesting at the time when they were running this, all of a sudden the Shave Club for Men and Harry started doing a lot of promotion on Facebook and reaching a lot of guys. And this really hit quite a visceral nerve for people too. And then you also start thinking about it in terms of, it lost sight of something else. At some point, there's like a few minutes of the day where a guy is shaving, wants a little bit of peace, and they're being lectured. So if that is an issue that's important to Gillette, really important, there probably could have been better ways to go about this with various school support programs or so forth. And then there was this program called the Pissed Off Meals that Burger King did. Now, they were showing people with mental disabilities in, frankly, a pretty much of an unsympathetic light. And then when I was showing this to a lot of the workshop people that I deal with, so a lot of the feedback was one of the worst things you could do is to promote burgers and so forth if you were suffering from a mental condition. It almost was too frivolous. You may agree with that when you see it. So once again, it's not that this is a wrong issue, it's how that gets executed and the divisiveness that is there. Now, Dick's, on the other hand, really relied mostly on public relations and so forth, and really had a much more thoughtful process. Whether you're, in support of what they did or not, their sales went up and they continue to be strong. So they thought it through really carefully and realized they were not just going to focus in on the cosmetics of social responsibility or social justice to kind of get them through this. Next slide, Dave. And of course, this goes back a couple of years ago. Pepsi had a real fiasco when they had Kendall Jenner was being featured, and then there was during the whole protests that were going on, and the millennials and people that were more activists really, really hated this spot, and there was like a Twitter storm on this, and they pulled this particular commercial like within a day or so. And Pepsi said they were just trying to promote peace. And it was like people were protesting that this trivialized protest. But the bigger issue for even a Pepsi at the time was Was this even an issue that would appeal to Pepsi drinkers? Is that their crowd? Is this their core franchise? It's a good question to actually ask. Maybe one of their other brands would have. So going into 2020, the Economist makes quite a prediction with regards to a lot of the social justice stuff going on, and that it's risky, and that a lot of it may start to temper or perhaps go away, but there is a big risk related to it in three areas. One is hypocrisy for a company. For those that watch the Golden Globes, or if you didn't watch the Golden Globes, you probably saw the Ricky Gervais introduction that's gotten quite a bit of airplay. And he called Tim Cook, who was in the audience, out right there in front of everyone for hypocrisy, and also a lot of the celebrities for dealing with companies that have basically slave shops overseas to develop their products and services. You also have the potential of a recession. And right now, everything is really good economically. So it becomes easier to do all of these particular issues. But if the recession hits, it's going to become more back to basic. But the third one really becomes probably the most core you have to really watch out for. And that is ideological shifts. There is a lot of change happening all the time. There's a lot of different opinions. There's an awful lot of groups that are attacking each other on this. And you have to ask yourself, to what degree do you really want to get involved in the vortex of some of these issues? Okay, next slide, Dave. Yeah, no, that one, that was one that was being deleted before. Okay. So there is a method I've actually developed before through Vital Links, and have worked this through for a few different companies, called Brand Breath, which really helps. Basically, you inhale to really determine what are the right types of insights, the right types of audiences. So when you exhale, you're not just making noise. That you're really developing something that's well grounded in your key audiences, what their issues are, who to align with, and how to develop the right program. Next slide. And this goes through basically a 5-phase process. One is what I'll call the vital targets. Target audiences or target segments where the advocacy of their brand is critical to your future success. Not necessarily just customers. It could be government leaders, it could be industry leaders, it could be people that are within your category, it could be those that are really the influencers overall. The second is, what are those vital issues? What are the issues where the brand must be perceived as credible and knowledgeable expert, and sometimes not necessarily directly related to your product, but on the periphery? And, I'll give you 2 examples coming up in a moment. Third, what are the vital alliances that you need to have? If you don't have the expertise to be able to stand credibly for certain issues, who do you need to align yourself with so that you are? If you think back on the masculinity one, and also the one about mental health, if there was more of an overt connection to some other organizations that can speak with authority, perhaps those would have been received much better. Next, and then of course, what are the programs that maximize your leadership and provide a competitive advantage along with those alliances? And then the last phase of this would be, what's the vital scorecard, which is that dashboard that's important, that provides the verdict in terms of whether all of your venues are really working or not. So we're going to give a couple of examples that actually go into issues, alliances, and programs very, very quickly. Next slide. I want to talk first about Cigna, and then the next one was going to be about a small ice cream shop near me. Now, Cigna had a major issue going back a few years ago, related to. Excuse me, one second. You know what I had to do? There was a cat scratching at my door, and I had to get the cat away from the door, which is annoying.
That's important, Ed.
It's unbelievable, unbelievable. Yeah, Cigna had a major issue with regards to a couple of things, or their audiences did. What were the major cost drivers for their business, and what were the issues that were creating the biggest mortality rates for their customers? and that also cost drivers for their business customers as well. And those issues really kind of centered around, the following: infant prematurity or infant health, childhood obesity, something called gender disparities, which basically was focusing mainly on women's heart disease, issues with regards to brain health, and mental health, and then over-the-counter and pharmaceutical drug abuse. So they were pretty much ahead of their time in thinking through some of these issues. But as an insurance company, they couldn't, these are all very important to those various vital targets we talked about. As an insurance company, believe it or not, although they had a lot of knowledge, they couldn't speak with real authority or be accepted as credible authority on those issues. And so partnerships and alliances were developed with a variety of organizations that did have expertise in those areas. So, for example, the March of Dimes for Infant Health, Healthy Kids Challenge, which got kids a lot of active for kids throughout the United States for childhood obesity. The Women's Heart Organization out of Washington, D.C., which has done for years an incredible job for women to identify when they are at risk for heart disease, for issues related to depression and addictions, in a partnership with MIT's Pacauer Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and for pharmaceutical drug abuse, a partnership with Partnership for Drug-Free America. And how this manifested was basically a detailed content series that included not only sponsored editorial content in places like the Wall Street Journal and other publications, but leadership conferences, symposiums, white papers, a lot that actually helped establish the intellectual leadership and credibility for Cigna in those areas. Next slide. And these are just a few examples of how this manifested. This was, in particular, some of the work that appeared in the Wall Street Journal on their thought leadership with MIT over depression. Next slide. It all focused in on how they were presenting their brand too, in terms of called HELP. Addiction in the workplace, a huge issue that people don't talk about too much. Had speakers on that. Next slide. And for women's heart disease, the partnership with Women Heart in Washington, D.C., visually and graphically showing what happens when this happens, and really brought to the forefront issues that nobody was really talking about, where a lot of the testing for heart disease is done on men as opposed to women. And so this started to change things and start to change perceptions. But what were some of the results that we learned as a result of all this? Oh, look, we're getting fancy. Now, what I didn't talk about was that at the time, Cigna actually went through a cut, about a 25% cut in their marketing budgets, but yet the brand strength grew. The brand scores actually grew. And readership was always top readership in the Wall Street Journal when it was running. The then CEO of the Wall Street Journal called together all of their sales reps and said, this is how people should be utilizing the Wall Street Journal. This is how your clients should be. Use this as a basis to get more business. Now, as that happened, we were able to get even better deals from the media because they were so happy with how this made them look as well. So media partners ended up doing more for less money. And then in terms of intellectual capital, besides getting all of that, what I'll call the cosmetics out there in terms of how we look to the public, Cigna got smarter as an organization because they got, through these alliances, advanced information on these various conditions, what to do about it, and that ultimately impacted their ability in terms of how to price and how to market. And so ultimately, there were business connections that were provided as well, not just overall content. Next slide. Okay, so let's make this more relevant. Let's take it in a way, take it down a notch, but actually take it up a notch. And how does this relate to some of the smaller retailers or local businesses? And it's all relative. I live in a town called Milford, Connecticut. We're about 60 miles outside of New York City, located between, if you know the geography of the area, between like Bridgeport and New Haven. And in our town, we have, we have a number of ice cream shops. Who doesn't like ice cream? One is called the Walnut Beach Creamery, and the other one is a local franchisee of Carvel, which is a national chain. Now let's kind of talk. Next. Thanks, Dave. And a little bit of background on each. Walnut Beach Creamery is one store. It sells handcrafted gourmet ice cream. It's near a beach location, as you can tell by its name, and it's been in business since about 2006. In terms of Carvel, they are one of 400 stores throughout the United States, and they sell soft serve ice cream. They actually were discovered accidentally around about 1934 when Tom Carvel actually delivered ice cream in a truck to some other company, and I guess it broke down. The refrigeration broke down, and then it suddenly discovered, wow, this soft ice cream is really good. So he went up his own business, and it's near our town center in Milford. Next slide. The Walnut Beach Creamery is led by a woman by the name of Susan Patrick. She's very visible on site at all times. You could probably tell from some of the visuals up there. She's got some very vibrant and pretty branding that works very well. She's extremely involved in the community, and she staffs her business with happy teenagers who love customers and the joy of ice cream. Sounds really obvious, doesn't it? And then if you go to Carvel, the Carvel owner is not very visible. He's hardly ever there. There is virtually no community involvement. He staffs it with teenagers who are more obsessed with their phones than their customers. You think about it, same age groups of kids. If you describe them demographically, they're exactly the same, but attitudinally different. You go in anytime they're looking at their phones. And they've been known to close early if the kids feel like they just want to close early. In fact, there was a big Facebook controversy here not too long ago where there was a fellow that was bringing his, I guess, 4-year-old son who was close to closing time, was getting like a few minutes before 9 o'clock p.m. And they saw him coming and they ran out and locked the door so he couldn't get in. So he posts on the local Facebook about what they did. And then people started yelling at him about, well, you shouldn't be bringing your kid out for ice cream at 9 p.m. And I'm thinking, you're losing the point. But they're going back and forth on all this, and then it was amazing how many people started complaining about this same ice cream shop because of their poor treatment. Great ice cream, so people still go for Carvel. But that whole notion of how you're treated is just lost. Next slide. Okay, so what's the social responsibility aspect related to this ice cream shop, Walnut Beach Creamery? Now, if you think about Walnut Beach itself, it was once a thriving destination for vacationers many years ago until people were able to afford to go to more exotic locations. And over time, it fell into vacancies. Businesses were shut down. There was a lot of disrepair, and people vacationed elsewhere. And when you have, a beachfront community that's going into disrepair, then, a lot of other bad things start to happen around there. But Susan saw opportunity where ice cream could help bring back some joy. Next slide. And she started thinking through some of the factors that, ice cream and beaches are an iconic match. Artists are always been inspired by the beach, and Milford's coastal area needs some joy. Next slide. So what were the issues, alliances, and programs that kind of made sense with her own version of brand breath, where he decided to inhale, take it all in, think it through, and then figure out what really makes sense? Well, the issues were really as follows: that the area needed an economic boost, very tired, and it needs to be a destination again. But also some of the issues related to that: what about safety for families and for children? And is there an opportunity to inspire citywide revitalization? And so by thinking this through, and some of those audiences are really more the government leaders and movers and shakers within town, and those that, besides, families and so forth with children. What were some of those alliances that made sense for her? Well, besides just getting involved with selling ice cream, she got involved very much with the local Economic Development Commission, and then heading what is called the Walnut Beach Association, and the local Fine Arts Council, and then created actually the Walnut Beach Arts Association to encourage artists to come in and have a lot of different events that were more arts oriented. And then for kids, get involved with the boys clubs and girls clubs that were locally and as a pretty strong organization in our town, so that you're hitting not only the art community and the movers and shakers, but people with kids and families. And then the programs that were developed was a series of different programs like Thursday night strolls, a weekly dance party, charity beach walks, a taste of Milford. Some of these were things that she was involved in and some that she would lead. And then I also put down, she had different programs where the beach goes to you, where she was very actively involved with women's roller derby and different events that are important to the community, where she would be there and her people would be there. So you can't come to the beach comes to you. Now you could stop that and you could look at hold on, go back to the second day. You could look at a chart like that, and you could say, if you all you did was look at the programs, you could simply say, yeah, okay, we got to get involved in this program or that program or whatever. Those programs would not have been as well thought through had she not thought through those two other areas before. What are those issues of importance, and who do you align yourself with, and how does that manifest ultimately to those programs? Okay, next slide. And ultimately, you get what is the best thing you possibly get, which is advocacy. And this is a recent quote from our mayor, who actually is pretty popular. Susan has transformed Walnut Beach, not just with ice cream, but as head of the Walnut Beach Association now, since she got an award for what she does. Lines always out the door. Strong advocacy on her Facebook. There's rarely any lines at Carvel. In fact, there's many disgruntled comments about it. It doesn't mean Carvel's going out of business. Doesn't mean that people aren't going to go there. But she's developed a franchise of loyal customers that can go there time and time again, which also leads to other leadership opportunities for herself. All by simply looking at saying, there's an opportunity here of something being neglected. This beach particular area being neglected, and figuring out, thinking more about just the benefits of ice cream, but the role that ice cream, the iconic role that ice cream plays with beach communities and other communities and development, and you take it from there. And God knows where this growth could actually go with that kind of a mindset for her. So, that kind of thinking will take her to many positive places. And it's not self-oriented. It's truly community-oriented and truly customer-oriented. When you go back to some of those larger companies that I kind of cited earlier, they seem to be thinking too much more about themselves as opposed to really what's important and what and why people really love their product and service, and how that relates to a number of different areas. Next slide, Dave. Oh, it's a low-hanging fruit. All right, kind of fall into about 5 different areas. Really, what is important to your customers? You can't skip that one. If you're focusing more on what's important to yourself, you're going to go down you might go off in a tangent that's not going to take you where you need to go. But what is important to your customers even beyond the product? So clearly in her case, things that are important in terms of the community she's involved with beyond just ice cream itself. And then how does your business align with a social need? And does it? And if it does, what are the controversies? And you have to take that into consideration very, very seriously, because if there's certain controversies, you need to be willing to say, I'm willing to take that on and possibly lose customers, as opposed to just gain customers. Identify the stakeholders, the community organizations, those people that could really help you overall with credibility for what you're doing, the stances you want to take, the positions you want to be in, and where they can bring additional credibility for you. And get involved. If you're going to get involved with some of these organizations, as Susan did, get involved beyond donations. Just don't give money. Give yourself. I think as David can really associate with this, since he's the master of networking, you network, and when you network, you really build additional strength beyond your own brain power, and then craft a program with those alliances with people so that it becomes a complete win-win overall. what she has done has not only benefited her customers, but it's benefited the boys clubs, girls clubs. It's benefited a lot of different organizations. It's benefited the overall life and breadth of the community. And with that, she ends up having a real thriving business. So, David, I think, oh, one more slide. Okay, so some closing thoughts and just personal opinions, because again, as you get into things like social justice and so forth, there's a lot of things that are really more opinion based than anything. And that is, most large brands' social justice programs seem to be self-driven versus truly customer-driven, and that was kind of what I was just saying before. They're playing to and oftentimes personal or employee issues as opposed to those that are really resonating with customers. And as we see with Gillette, the moment you sort of lose sight of that, people will advocate against you. And I actually went recently back on their YouTube site, and there's a bunch of guys that will continue to go back on there saying, I'm still going back on here and making sure they're not deleting my negative comments. I don't know if that's the kind of advocacy you want.
Oh, wow.
Now, social responsibility programs make sense when that business interest is aligned with the social interest. That's why I think the Signia was a good example from a large company and Walnut Beach Creamery from one that's more localized. And if you think it through carefully, social responsibility can work wonders for smaller companies as they take on and fight the Goliath. She's able to fight Carvel in our local community just by being able to figure out how to align herself with issues that make sense for her customers and the community from which she thrives. And that's my long version of a short story. I think I turn it back on to you, Dave.
Okay, let's go ahead and open this up for questions. This is definitely, thank you so much for this presentation, because what you've done is delved into an area that is wide open. It's an area that most businesses are not just flocking to, and especially small businesses. So, and it seems like there are some principles that at least stuck with me. One is authenticity, and I'm thinking of Susan at the Walnut Beach Creamery, and it seems to me that she didn't go about this social justice marketing for the sake of marketing necessarily, but she had a real heart for her community. Yeah. And then leverage that heart she had for her community. She probably hired employees who also were concerned about the community and concerned about people. And then she just expanded that. So she took what she already had, which was at her heart, and then expressed that through her business. And it worked for Susan. If on the other hand, a business were to say, okay, I'm going to be socially responsible in order to gain visibility in my community, that could play out in an entirely different way. And, I guess what you were saying, Ed, is you've seen both sides to.
Yeah. And I think, in Susan's case, it's easier because she lives it. She's there and can see it. And so, I think it's, in a weird way, it's easier to be authentic. When you're coming from a large company or medium size, whatever, the moment you're in an office building and you're outside of, and you're not really seeing the people who consume your product day in and day out, it's very easy to get trapped in yourself as opposed to getting trapped into their lives. So that's why I say in a weird way she has it easier, because she's able to see firsthand. And I think that especially some of the folks that may be listening in today, if they're smaller businesses or more retail based, you have constant research right in front of you all the time. But I think your comment is extremely well taken. If you have to have your heart really in that, and that will ultimately generate authenticity. And if you don't have it, trouble can really follow.
Stan, it looks like you might be wanting to chime in.
Yeah, I've usually got something to say.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Now, there are several observations that I have with regard to what you were just saying, Ed, about Susan is there and she's living it on a day-to-day basis, and yeah, her finger is always on the pulse. Whereas with the larger companies, if that company doesn't have that culture built in, then those managers and those employees at that location are not going to take that lead. In most instances, they're not going to take that lead to go and become a part of that and do that. And so that's where I see a huge difference there with larger companies. And I look at what happened with me with my martial arts business back in Denver, and I see a lot of parallels with what Susan did. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. You know, I was a member of the local Chamber of Commerce there, and I sat on a committee, one of the committees with the superintendent for the school board. And that allowed us to then get involved with schools. So we would go to the schools and we would teach a stranger danger course to the students. So every summer I would hit all the schools, we'd do a stranger danger course. Now, what that did was two things. It gave us more exposure, obviously, but what it did is it taught kids what to look for while they were going to be out playing all summer long, and they're playing on the streets and they get approached by strangers. We were doing a community service by going out and teaching that to the kids. And then we would do a confidence program at the schools. And so it was another thing that wasn't us just going in and saying, hey, look at us, look at us, look at us. It was, how can we provide value to you and teach the kids something that then the parents would turn around and say, wow, where did you get that? Where did you learn to shake hands like that and look people in? Where did you learn to look for these specific traits from strangers that are going to protect you? And so we did a lot of things like that in the community in a lot of different ways, but that was us taking an active role in the community, and it paid off.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it tied into your business model, tied into your brand in terms of, defense and protection. And, and it's beautiful. And it's not just a program for the sake of a program. There's so many companies say, hey, okay, I'll donate something, or yeah, put my ad in your program book. The way to look at it is there's so much ability to tie into some different organizations and different issues that absolutely make sense and are needed, and are authentic. I mean, kudos to you for that. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I think that's really, that's a type of genius, Stan, because you didn't do like the local streets cleanup where, okay, we're going to clean the streets. You didn't do, let's all give blood. The things that you focused on were very much aligned with your brand, as Ed said. And that's a real question to ask, is a, initial question: what is my brand, and what social activities would align with that brand?
Well, I wish I could take all the credit for coming up with those ideas, but that's something that the martial arts industry is really good at. The martial industry does those kinds of activities on a regular basis, right? I mean, we look for opportunities of where can we teach free women's self-defense classes, right? We get on a radio spot and talk about Halloween safety, so that now while the kids are out doing their trick-or-treating around Halloween, we're giving them something valuable, but it puts us out there as a community leader and someone that is concerned about the well-being in the community. So it really made us one of those pillars in the community that people could look towards for those kinds of resources.
It's interesting because it made you vital. It makes you vital, as opposed to, well, this is a nice thing to do, have my kid learn martial arts. No, it actually ramps up the importance of what your core offering is.
That's right. It absolutely did. Yeah, and you hit on a very important point there, because you know, some of the engagement with schools was that when our students were going to test for their new rank, we also we started a campaign where we were sending a letter to the teacher asking about the students' behavior in class. Now, the students knew that their teacher was going to have to report on their behavior in class, and that impacted whether or not they got their belt. We tended to get much better behavior from the students in class. So we saw ourselves as a pillar between the home environment, the martial arts environment, and the school environment. And so when we can get all three of those working in sync, we create a better little human being there. And so literally, it ties right into the business model and into the business, but it also had an impact that was far-reaching outside of our four walls.
Yeah, you know, I've also been struck by that some of this, kind of goes back to dealing with different nonprofits or other organizations. Sometimes I think you could almost flip the equation a little bit and say, if you're in a nonprofit, what can you do besides putting up, like I drove by our green the other day, and every year the United Way has this thermostat. We're 80% of our goal. You think, yes, companies get kind of coerced into giving money. Hopefully no one from the United Way is getting mad about this. But you can flip it a little bit and say, listen, if you're one of these organizations, like the Signet case with March of Dimes and Women Art, you have intellectual capital to bring to the table to your business partners to help make them a better business form, and align better. So it kind of works a couple of ways. And I haven't seen a whole lot of that thinking coming from the nonprofit world, and I think it's a huge opportunity for them too to think about it in terms of what is that value that I provide to them besides just asking them for a donation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very excellent. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, and so what I want to do is flip over to there. So we've got Ed's contact information for further questions, and that'll be on the replay video. And speaking of the replay video, I promised to show you how to get there. So let me go ahead and minimize this. And here we are at the marketing department. So we're on the home page once again, marketingdepartmentlv.com. We go to the webinars link, and we look at all the webinars that marketing department has sponsored, and then we go to the social justice link, and here is Ed's webinar replay page. The webinar replay video will be inserted here I'd say within 24 hours following this webinar, and then you can see the purpose statements, what you're going to learn, and then here's all the slides. So you've got that. If you want to review, and then following this, there will be, and there's Ed's contact information. There'll be webinar notes. What I'll do, Ed, is you send me those links that you mentioned that you'd like included. I will include them up front so people don't have to scroll all the way down to find them. And we'll put them up here. And so that'll just be available for people to further study. They really encourage people to get involved in their community and in social justice, social responsibility ways, and be a transformative agent, because when you're a transformative agent in your community, you're going to become magnetic and attractive.
David,
go ahead.
No, it's good. That's a great point at the end, because I almost forgot that too. One last point about that Carvel versus Walnut Beach Creamery. Okay. Carvel was just transaction, and she, in her business, was transformative. Mm-hmm. That's a completely different way of thinking of that.
Awesome.
Very different.
Okay, well, this concludes our webinar on social justice responsibility marketing. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, sir.